Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 3 defenses to stream for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, we're going to be going in depth into 5 defenses that I believe to have ideal matchups for week number 3 to have success in fantasy football. But before we get on into the in-depth breakdown of my top 5 defenses to stream for week number 3, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out this content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 fantasy football championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I'd also like to ask that if you guys have a Twitter and would like to follow me, to please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. The link to my Twitter is also down below in the description. So without further ado, let's get into the video. We begin with the first defense to stream of week number 3, and that is the Arizona Cardinals going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. In Jacksonville, they are rostered in 67.9% of NFL.com leagues. Now, the roster percentage on NFL, Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, Sleeper, depending on what website you play on, obviously that percentage is going to be different. So the Arizona Cardinals are not as readily available as the other defenses we're going to be discussing in this video, but I figured they did have such a great matchup this week up against the Jaguars that they should be noted in this video. Week 2, up against the Minnesota Vikings, the Arizona Cardinals defense definitely went back down to earth. And week number 1, up against the Tennessee Titans, the Arizona Cardinals defense looked like the fucking 85 Bears out there. They absolutely mauled the Tennessee Titans. Taylor Lewan got ran over by Chandler Jones. Ryan Tannehill got sacked 5 times by him. It was not a pretty sight to watch in week number 1. But in week number 2, like I said, the defense kind of went back down to earth. They had 1 sack up against the Minnesota Vikings, and they allowed 27 points in this matchup. But this week, they get way better of a matchup. I expected the Minnesota Vikings to be a tougher task than the Titans were in week number 1, because the Titans kind of just rolled over and died in that game. They stood absolutely no chance, whereas I thought the Minnesota Vikings would be able to at least get a semblance of an offense going, and it wouldn't be that much of a stomping up against them, which was the case, as the Minnesota Vikings looked very good. They ultimately lose the game because they don't know how to kick field goals in Minnesota, apparently. So the Jaguars last week, they played up against the Denver defense in Jacksonville, and they got rolled. 1 sack, 2 INTs, and 13 points allowed in that game for the Denver defense. Trevor Lawrence, while I expect to be a perfectly fine, maybe even an above average, maybe even an elite NFL quarterback a year or 2 from now, maybe even at the end of the season. But right now, things just aren't looking great for Trevor Lawrence. This guy's throwing interceptions left and right. Is it necessarily 100% his fault? Not all the time, but he is still going to be prone to getting turnovers. The offensive line isn't amazing, so he is going to get sacked potentially a couple of times in this game. The Jacksonville Jaguars offense is way worse than the Minnesota Vikings offense, so I think the Arizona Cardinals should be perfectly fine in this game to be an excellent defensive stream for week number 3 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Next up, we have the Denver Broncos, who we just touched upon when they played the Jaguars last week. This week, they're going up against the New York Football Jets. They're rostered in 37.9% of NFL fantasy leagues. So when it comes to the Denver Broncos, they were the one defense that I was really banging the drum for aggressively before your fantasy season started, in the draft season, as a team that I wanted you guys to draft, because in week number 1, the Denver Broncos got the Giants, and then in week number 2, they got the Jaguars, and in week number 3, they get the Jets. Now, I expected by week number 3 that Zach Wilson would look like a more competent NFL quarterback than he looked in week number 1. He has been a target of these defensive stream videos for week 1, week 2, as well as week 3. In week number 1, I was talking about how the Carolina Panthers defense is pretty underrated, how the Jets offense won't look all that great, and that defense was going to be able to have a solid game. Then in week number 2, last week, I talked up the Patriots defense, and boy, did the Patriots defense look great up against the Jets. And now this week, I'm going to be touting the Denver Broncos up against the Jets. So week 2, up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, again, to kind of reiterate, the Denver Broncos defense had 1 sack, 2 INTs, and 13 points allowed in that game. Of note, they also looked relatively good in week number 1 up against the Giants. So last week, going up against the Jets offense, the Patriots defense in New York had 4 sacks, 4 INTs, and 6 points allowed. They could call him fucking Zach Wilson with how many times the guy was getting laid on his ass in that game. Zach Wilson looked bad. In week number 1, I thought Zach Wilson looked terrible, and then coming out of the second half up against the Panthers, he actually started to look like a competent NFL quarterback. So I expected, hey, this is a tough matchup up against the Patriots, but it's not going to be a stomping, right? The Jets are at least going to put some points on the board. They did do that, I guess. They put up 6 points on the board, but Zach Wilson looked terrible. Zach Wilson was throwing just to the other team. He was doing the Jameis Winston special where he throws the ball and he's like, oh, I thought they were wearing this color jersey. I thought I was on this team. He's just throwing it to the other team. He had no fucking idea what he was doing out there. He looked awful. After the game, the Jets media go up to him and they say, hey, Zach, were you seeing ghosts out there, making fun of the fact that Sam Darnold was seeing ghosts a couple of years ago? And while Zach Wilson laughed it off, ha ha ha, so funny, right? It wasn't funny. Actually, the joke was funny, but it wasn't funny about your performance on Sunday. You looked terrible. And I understand that maybe the Patriots defense is better than the Broncos defense, but they're still pretty close. The Broncos have one of the better defenses in the NFL. Sure, Zach Wilson will be able to adjust. Sure, he may not look as bad as he looked on Sunday, but I think the Denver Broncos are one of the best defenses to stream this week, and somehow they're still available in 37.9% of leagues, despite having a great week 1, week 2, as well as week 3 matchup. Next up, we have the Carolina Panthers defense going up against the Houston Texans in Houston on Thursday Night Football. They're rostered in 5.7% of leagues right now on NFL.com. But before we get on into the breakdown of the Panthers, I'd like to ask if you guys have ended up enjoying this video thus far to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hitting the like button. I would appreciate that a ton. So week 2, up against the New Orleans Saints, the Carolina Panthers defense looked amazing. 4 sacks, 2 INTs, and 7 points allowed up against a team that just rolled through the Packers. That game just went to show completely the Jameis special. Jameis goes from week number 1 on top of the world up against the Packers, 5 touchdowns, 0 INTs, to week number 2, throwing 2 interceptions. You know, it is what it is. It's the Jameis special. One week he's amazing, the next week he's ice cold. In week number 3, I wouldn't be surprised if this guy threw 6 touchdowns, but it also wouldn't surprise me if he threw 2 touchdowns and 5 picks, because that's just what Jameis Winston gives you. Now this week he gets the Houston Texans. Tyrod Taylor was actually starting to look really good, which was shocking. In week number 1 for the Houston Texans, Tyrod Taylor looked like one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. Now obviously, off of a 1-game sample size, I'm not going to go ahead and tell you that Tyrod Taylor is a great NFL quarterback, but he looked really good. In week number 2, going up against the Saints, he looked really good, and then he ended up getting hurt, sadly. So in this game, since it's a Thursday game, it's a short week, we're not going to be seeing Mr. Tyrod Taylor in this game, which means we get the Davis Mills special. Now, Davis Mills isn't some complete and utter fucking trash can, but if the Panthers were able to do that to the Saints offense, if they were able to only allow 7 points to the Saints, then what are they going to do to the Houston Texans offense without Tyrod Taylor? Now, many people might think, hey, Nick, maybe Deshaun Watson is going to be able to play this game. Maybe there's a realistic chance that since Tyrod's hurt, they play Deshaun Watson, but that's not realistic because they already came out and said that that's not going to happen. So any hope of Deshaun Watson playing at this point, the reason why I kind of brought it up is because if you have him on your fantasy team, I'm definitely just cutting him at this point. It seems like there's absolutely 0 chance that this guy plays this year unless my Miami Dolphins somehow trade for him, which I doubt is going to happen because we are going to be talking about the Dolphins in a couple of minutes. It seems like Tua is going to be fine whether it's this game or just a week or 2 from now. So the Carolina Panthers defense here is in for a big spot up against the Texans. Last week, the Browns played up against the Houston Texans. They had 1 sack, 1 INT, one fumble recovery, as well as 21 points allowed. And the Browns defense didn't look great early on in that game because Tyrod Taylor does look really good. Tyrod Taylor looks the best I've ever seen this man look in his NFL career, at least based upon recent memory. But it's not going to be Tyrod Taylor. It's going to be Davis Mills. So I'm really confident in the Panthers defense, who has looked stout in the first 2 weeks of the season. Next up, we have the, turn your volume down a little bit, the Las Vegas Raiders going up against the Miami Dolphins, rostered in 10.2% of NFL leagues. I don't remember if I said how much the Carolina Panthers were rostered in. The answer is 5.7%. 8.7%. So with the Raiders, Tua is currently dealing with a rib injury. Brian Flores, head coach of the team, comes out and says that, hey, Tua's a tough guy. His game status would be a matter of pain tolerance. He's going to be potentially wearing a flak jacket in that game. He tried to return up against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday. He wasn't allowed to, and the expectation is that he should be back to practice in 2 days on Wednesday. Will Tua play? Will he not play? I don't know. My guess is that he's going to play. Tua seems like the kind of guy who he'll take that shot to the ribs or whatever. Hopefully the Dolphins doctor is better than the Chargers doctor so that we don't get a lung stabbing scenario like we had with Tyrod Taylor last year. A nice throwback to what we were just talking about. But even so, the Dolphins, even as a Dolphins fan, I'll go right out and tell you, the Dolphins offensive line fucking stinks. We are sending Tua out there to potentially just get hurt again. And that sucks. It sucks to know that our offensive line is a turnstile. It is terrible. It is going to open wide up, and it is going to get Tua tackled and tackled and tackled, sacked. He's going to get absolutely pulverized in this game, but the best chance the Dolphins have to win the game is by bringing Tua out there. Now, the Raiders are probably one of the most surprising teams of the year. They looked very good week 1 up against the Ravens. They kind of, got by up against the Steelers, so they're 2-0 right now. The defense has looked relatively solid. Week 2 up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, they had 2 sacks, 1 INT, as well as 17 points allowed last week. Up against the Dolphins, now, again, this is kind of unfair in a way because Tua was hurt for a majority of the game. But again, it still fucking counts on the record. You still got all the fantasy points that the Bills got. 6 sacks, 1 INT, 2 fumble recoveries, and 0 points allowed. Now, even if Tua doesn't play this week, I expect Jacoby Brissett to at least reach the end zone once. I expect us to at least kick 1 fucking field goal in this game, okay? I don't expect us to get absolutely routed, but I still think the Las Vegas Raiders are a solid streaming option regardless of if Tua is in the game or not, because just how bad this offensive line is. Jesse Davis needs to be cut off the team. I don't know why we even drove him back. I guess that he doesn't get on the bus, right? Because it was in Miami. So I'm surprised we didn't just let him drive home and then just cut the guy. I don't want anything to do with that man. Tua, I hope you are okay as a Dolphins fan. And I'm sure if you guys like football, you probably like Tua. He doesn't, at least to me, he doesn't seem like too bad of a guy. Next up, we have the final defense on the docket. That is the Tennessee Titans going up against the Indianapolis Colts, 3.1% rostered. Now you might be thinking, Nick, the Tennessee Titans defense fucking sucks. Why are you going to be starting the Titans defense? It's basically because Wentz is dealing with not one, but a double ankle injury. He's dealing with an injury to both ankles. How does that happen? I don't know. No idea, but that's what they're reporting. That doesn't sound good. Sounds like maybe he's going to miss this game. And despite the Tennessee Titans defense being complete and utter dog shit, it's not going to matter because Jacob Eason isn't that great. Now, does that mean you have to run away from all the Colts players? Probably not, but it does make me worry a lot. And maybe it is going to be safe to sit a lot of those guys besides Jonathan Taylor, who had a bad game in week number 2. So the Titans, again, they don't have a great defense, but this is a solid matchup up against Seattle. They had 3 sacks and 30 points allowed, but that is up against a very tough Seattle Seahawks offense. In week number 2, for the Rams going up against the Colts, again, the Rams, one of the better defenses in the NFL, but they got 3 sacks, 2 INTs, and 18 points allowed. While this is definitely a long shot of a take, is it possible that Carson Wentz could play this week? 100%. If that does end up happening, then I'm probably cutting the Titans and looking elsewhere, but I'm fine taking the risk on the Tennessee Titans this week, especially since it is very likely, at least in my mind, that Jacob Eason is the starter, and Eason just ain't that guy, pal. Trust me. He ain't that guy. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below as well as hitting that like button. I would appreciate it immensely. I love you guys so much. I hope you did enjoy the video. If you have any questions, comments, and concerns, please make sure you leave them in the comment section. I love you guys all. As always, goodbye.